And we're talking about COVID-19 with a lot of questions today. Dr. Rohini Sharma, she's an infectious disease doctor, answering some of these questions for us. Doctor, thanks so much for taking the time.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for
Now,
inviting me.
you bet. Now that a vaccine is on the horizon here within weeks, a lot of people have questions, especially with more people having become sick with COVID-19.
Mhm.
The first question I want to ask you is, if someone has had the infection, do they need to get the vaccine?
Um, so, uh, what we develop after an infection is something called antibodies. So, our body produces antibodies against a particular infection, and in this case, it's COVID infection. The utility of the antibody testing has not been defined for the presence of immunity to this infection. Within days after COVID infection, the COVID patients develop antibodies. These antibodies protect block the infection. Although our immune system responds to infection by producing antibodies, we don't know if these antibodies will protect, and if they do, for how long. Also, not all patients who have had the infection developed antibodies. So there's also a decay, natural decay in the level of these antibodies, and they start decreasing as early as 8 weeks after infection. So it's not long lasting that they stay in the blood. And then secondly, we do not know if they're good enough to fight an infection. The good news is, out of millions of infections that have happened in the world, we just have a handful of reinfections. So there is some encouragement that there might be some immunity afforded by developing an infection, but we do not know if that is good enough and how long that lasts. So
So
I would not go by the level of the antibody, by the presence of antibodies as being immune.
explain to us in layman's terms for the general population, when a
Mm-hmm.
vaccine is created, it's actually a form of the virus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're getting a vaccine that is the virus. Some people are saying if they had a very difficult case with the virus, they feel as if, and I know science needs to back this up, that
Mm.
they have more immunity than a vaccine might get. Might that be the case for some people?
No, that's not the case for any of the people who have developed the infection. As I said, body does produce antibodies in response to infection. The level of antibodies decline with time. They're produced initially to neutralize infections. A vaccine, there are different kinds of vaccines that are being produced right now. The ones out there in the news are the viral vector vaccine, in which a virus has been genetically engineered so that it cannot cause disease, but it produces the coronavirus proteins to safely generate an immune response. This is a viral vector vaccine. The second is an RNA vaccine, which is a cutting edge technology which uses genetically engineered RNA. What RNA in a body does is produce proteins. In the case of these vaccines, it goes in and produces particular kind of spike protein, which our body is subjected to in a controlled fashion and makes antibodies to, and long-lasting T and B cell memory cells. These are the ones that help you fight the real infection when you're subjected to it. So, and then there's also protein-based vaccines, which are harmless fragments of protein that mimic the COVID virus to safely generate an immune response. So these are all safe generation of immune response
I wanted to ask
versus,
you about
sorry.
the memory cells. Um, we hear a lot of people talking about memory cells that might not show up in an antibody test that people are
Perfect.
talking
Yeah.
about. So if that
Yes.
doesn't show up, does your body activate those when exposed to something like the coronavirus? They would then activate and potentially protect you?
Yeah. So memory cells are generated, that they can be T or B kind, after being subjected to an infection. And they are something that are banked in our body, if you will. And when subjected to the real infection, they go ahead and produce specific kind of antibody to fight the infection when it comes back. So we don't have so far as far as I know, I think I checked a few days ago, we don't have a good T or B cell immunity testing lab test for COVID infection yet.
I think a lot of people have that question.
Mm.
When it comes to getting back out into society or back to work, Is it
Mhm.
safe for people to think I've had the infection, so I'm okay to go shopping or to go back into the workplace? Or for teachers who are saying, I want to be able to get kids back into the school, I've had it, so I'm the best person to go back and teach. Is that a mentality that you encourage?
No, I would not recommend that because although our immune system generates antibody against the infection, we do not know what particular level of antibody is needed to protect you from this infection. Again, secondly, not all patients produce the antibodies. And then also a lot of patients, when tested, retested for antibodies, they don't have them anymore. And the level of antibody declines after 8 weeks or so. So I wouldn't recommend people stepping out in the community thinking as if they're immune
So that
after having the real infection.
okay, that leads to the next question that is if you've had it, which now millions of people have, do you need to get the vaccine?
I would highly recommend the vaccine. This is the only safe way of developing immunity against this infection. Um, I I'm not saying that you will be protected 100%. No vaccine is 100% protective, but it will prevent a person from dying. I mean, a natural infection, you know how severely the infection can cause symptoms, and you could get intubated and you could get, you die quickly for this infection. It is not something I would want. So this vaccine is going to protect you from severe infection. You may or may not get mild symptoms of cold, or just like you get any other common cold. This is another kind of coronavirus. This is actually the seventh coronavirus we've discovered.
Mm.
So the other three coronaviruses cause 25 to 30% of the common cold that we get. So the severity of infection will be very less even if you get the infection after being vaccinated.
Do we know how long the vaccine will last in a person's body?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and it's too early to know if these vaccines will provide long-term protection, and we do need additional research to answer this question. However, so far the data so far available is encouraging and suggests that most people who have developed an immune response do have some protection. So, time will tell.
It's interesting to me, and I think to a lot of other people, that there are certain people, although directly exposed by someone, aren't getting the virus. Do you have any thoughts about that? I know people who've said, I was exposed by a coworker or someone in my own household and they didn't develop it. Do you think potentially they're just not showing symptoms? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So different people react different way to the infection. Um, some people might have some people just don't develop symptoms, and a majority of them, the who have the condition set up as CDC, and that's the kind of patients that we see. The high risk patients, dialysis patients, cardiovascular diseases, COPDers, the people who have immune problems, and so on, they develop severe infections. So I do see a few people who are testing positive for COVID because they've been admitted for some other procedure, and they are asymptomatic. And they say asymptomatic. Yeah, there are those people too, but very few. A lot of the other patients, other people who have the risk factors, they can get very sick.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything to the different blood types? Hearing that people who are O blood type are less likely to develop COVID?
No, I don't think there's any. As far as I know, I don't have any information on that. When
Yeah.
I last checked, this wasn't correlated to um, to any protection from COVID infection.
There's so many different stories and so many
Mhm.
people trying to put some of these theories out there. Anything else that you think is important for people to know right now with the vaccine coming, hopefully here to Colorado and around the
Mhm.
country within the next month?
So I want to talk about herd immunity. It has been in the news,
Yes.
and some people believe that it can be herd immunity is developed by letting the virus spread. I just want to clarify, herd immunity is a concept used with vaccination, and it is a concept used with vaccination in which a population is protected from a virus if a threshold of vaccination is achieved. So herd immunity, for instance, for measles, requires 95% of people to be vaccinated. And those 5% people who are not vaccinated will be protected by the fact that there's no spread in the 95% of the people who have been immunized. So herd immunity is achieved by protecting people from a virus, not subjecting yourself to the virus. So I would recommend vaccination, and there's a whole proposed phases of vaccination distribution, and hopefully everybody would get vaccinated by summer, and we could mitigate this virus.
Do you think it's safe? One of the other big stories now is getting kids back to school, and that they are protected more, so not getting the virus as much. Do you think getting kids back to school, and we have to face the mental side of this and kids learning with we have to balance that with the virus. Do you think that's a good idea right now?
I would go by the local epidemiology of the infection in the particular area and go by CDPHE recommendations for school starting.
Yeah.
But personally, I think kids do not develop that severe an infection. They have an immunity, and if all precautions of masking, hand washing, and social distancing are practiced, then they should be safe in school.
All right. Well, we covered a lot on all of this. I appreciate your time and your
Sure.
input, and all the best to you and your patients too.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the chance.